We are in an environmental crisis, and Jewish tradition compels us to respond. Hazon is working with the Jewish community, with both individuals and institutions, to help them make changes to their actual behavior, their practices, to lower our environmental footprint, to not contribute to climate change, and in fact, to help reverse climate change. One of the biggest ways that we as a people, as organizations, are impacting the climate is through our food choices. And Hazon recently went through a strategic plan and realized that it makes so much work to focus on this intersection of food and climate change. And so that's become a new emphasized focus for us as an organization. So we created a position of a director of food and climate so that we would be able to better weave that focus through all of the programs that we do, develop new materials and and strengthen existing programs and develop new programs to help people take action to reduce the footprint of their personal behavior.
What are the most important lessons or tips that you've learned from your position?
One of the biggest things that has changed with my personal behavior is actually the belief about whether my personal choices matter. For me, it has been a struggle. I've been an environmental activist my entire adult life. And it's been my core cause, my core issue, but I have often doubted whether it really mattered what I did, whether my choice around this one meal or this one purchase or how I chose to get from this place to that place really counted, really mattered. And through the work and the learning that I've been doing around how societies make change, what our individual imprint and influence is, it's become really clear to me that it does. So one of the biggest changes that have happened for me isn't around any particular tip that I should use cloth napkins or eat a more plant-based diet. It's been just having that emphasis that it totally matters what I, on an individual level, do. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking about political advocacy, that we shouldn't be working to influence corporations, society as a larger whole to have better behavior. Those all also need to happen, but I'm not off the hook for my personal behavior. And that's reinforced through Jewish teaching as well. And so that's been one of the biggest learnings for me in the work that I've been doing at Hazon. Two examples of teachings that have been really influential in me really understanding my power as an individual. One came from a book by Jonathan Safran Foer called We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast. And Hazon created a discussion guide for Jewish communities to go along with that book. And part of my work was to help create this guide. And one of the teachings from that book that was really influential for me is there anything more narcissistic than believing the choices you make affect everyone? Only one thing, believing the choices you make affect no one. So that's, I think of Jonathan Safran Foer as a teacher for me, as a rabbi for me, and I found that to be a profound teaching. A couple of more traditional Jewish texts or older texts. One is that the one from, this is so beat up, I don't know if you can just see, like I've had ink spills and doodles on it, but this has actually been in my drawer for years, and it's from Pirkei Avot from Rabbi Tarfon. We are not obligated to complete the task, but neither are we free to desist. And I find that when I feel personally responsible for bringing down fossil fuels or saving the polar bears or whatever it might be, or lowering the entire Earth's temperature by a degree or two, like it's just like, oh, I can't do that. Never mind. Why am I even trying? And this just keeps me in check. It's not my job to do all of that. It's only my job to do my part. That's my right-sized job. And so that teaching helps me not get overwhelmed, and also helps me not say, it doesn't really matter. It totally matters what I do. It matters what we all do. And Jewish teaching supports us in that. Another Jewish teaching that has been really profound isn't any one teaching, but the fact that Our whole Torah is full of the stories of individuals who have had profound influence on generations of Jews, on our entire history, whether it's Miriam or Moses or Abraham or Joseph, all these people. We follow their individual stories and we see, whoa, the impact that these lives are having. It's been very clear for us as a religion that individuals really, really matter. And so that's just kind of woven through inherently in our tradition and has taught me a lot about what it can be to be a leader and someone who makes a difference.
So thinking about like eating sustainable and trying to have a more sustainable lifestyle, I know there's a lot of issues there with like people eating organic can be really, really expensive. And so like, do you have any tips or advice regarding people who want to maybe eat more sustainably or have a more sustainable lifestyle, but the financial situation really doesn't support it, or they don't have enough money to go and buy organic fruits and veggies?
So at Hazon, we focus on the connection between food and climate change for 5 reasons. One, we're in an environmental crisis and Jewish tradition compels us to respond, and we need to respond with urgency and with potency. So we really need to be focusing on the behaviors that matter the most, that have a really big impact environmentally. And Project Drawdown is the work of scientists and academics from around the world who've been doing studies and research and finding the top ways that we can be not only stopping or slowing climate change, but reversing climate change. And when they first came out, they had a list of the top 100 things you could do. And number 3 was reducing food waste. And number 4 was transitioning to plant-rich diets. Numbers 1 and 2 had to do with refrigerants and with wind power. And so those aren't really things that necessarily at the individual level you're going to do something about. But right there near the very top, number 3 and 4 are things that at a personal level and at a home level and at a synagogue or Hillel or JCC level, we can really be making big changes. And that's reducing our food waste and transitioning to plant-rich diets. So doing those 2 things are going to have high impact. So focusing on that is a top reason for Hazon that we're focusing on that. A second is that we don't contend that reducing food waste and transitioning to plant-rich diets are the sole actions needed to reverse climate change. However, while those 2 changes aren't sufficient, the science actually shows that they are necessary. Changing how we eat alone will not be enough to save the planet, but we cannot save the planet without changing how we eat. It's necessary. So that's a second reason. A third reason is food is central to Jewish life and tradition. Jews have been thinking about kashrut and what's fit to eat for 3,000 years. And so it's normal behavior for us to take very seriously our food choices. Number 4 reason for why Hazon's focusing on food and climate change is, you've stumbled on a good solution when it fixes more than one problem. By reducing food waste and or transitioning to plant-rich diets, you are not only contributing to the reversal of climate change, you're also addressing hunger, animal welfare, and personal health. That's the 4th reason. The 5th reason that I want to, and I'll elaborate on this a little bit, is that reducing food waste and transitioning to plant-rich diets are actions that can be taken immediately. They don't require special knowledge or training, and generally are cost neutral or even save money. And they're simple. They may not be easy. It might feel actually really challenging and hard to change your eating habits, but they're simple. You don't need to take a class or get a degree or hire an expert to come in and help you do it. And there's one of the myths around eating better for the earth is that it could be more expensive. And it could be, depending how you do it, but generally, and certainly if you want to be focusing on the climate impact of your food and focusing on reducing food waste and transitioning to plant-rich diets, you're going to save money. The amount of food wasted in the United States is about between 30 and 40%. And so society as a whole, we're wasting that amount. And the number one sector for where that food waste is coming from is residential. 44% of food waste is coming from households, residential. It's us in our houses. We're doing that. And the amount of money that that waste adds up to, they average, obviously it's going to be a range depending on what your personal practices are and the kind of food that you're wasting. But the average for the American household is about $1,800 a year of money we're just throwing down the drain by letting food go bad or just throwing it away because we didn't want it. And so reducing food waste is a money saver. Transitioning to plant-rich diets, generally meat, certainly if you're going by protein count, is a very expensive way to be acquiring your protein. And so getting plant-based protein is going to be more affordable. Of course, if you go and say, I'm going to replace this beef burger with an Impossible burger, you will be paying more because some of the meat replacement options are more expensive, but the other options out there that are very healthy, nuts, legumes, all the plants and vegetables out there that also all have protein in them, our grains, all of those have protein. Those are more affordable. And Yona, I know you were specifically asking about like organic. And so there's a lot of ways and tips that I can give specifically around organic if you want me to do that. Generally, though, organic isn't the big, huge hanging fruit in terms of climate impact. It's super important in terms of worker health, personal health, land health. Like organic is top important. And so happy to talk about that. But it's really reducing the food waste in the first place and transition to plant-rich diets, which are the biggest hanging fruit. So that's why I'm focusing on those. But if you want, I'm happy to dive into tips around organic. There can be a bit of a perception that eating well is a thing that wealthy people are able to do and that it's a privilege. And there's no question that having more money gives you more choices around food. And organics can get a very bad rap, but there's a couple of ways to address that. One, most of the large grocery store chains, if not all of them, have their own store brand organics now, and they are way cheaper than name brand organic. So if I want to go get a can of black beans or a bag of rice or bread or soups or salad dressings, any of those things, a lot of those are existing in the store brand organic. I shop at King Soopers in Colorado. They're part of the Kroger chain, and Kroger has their own line of organic products. Also, another tip to consider around that. So one is buying the store brand. Another is to get familiar with what's known as the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. You can just Google Dirty Dozen Clean 15. And this organization creates a list of the foods that are most heavily and least heavily loaded with pesticides. So organic, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's not a matter of everything you buy has to be organic or nothing is organic. And if what you're really trying to do is lower the amount of pesticides that you're getting and lowering the amount of pesticides that are happening just out in the world, wherever your food is being grown, visit that list and find the items on there, on the Dirty Dozen that you get most regularly, and say, okay, these 5 things I'm always going to get organic, and I'm not going to try and make my whole diet be organic, but these ones are where I'm going to get the biggest bang for my buck. And I'm not naming the specific ones on the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 because they actually update the list every year because the practices in agriculture change. It's not a frozen static field. And so check it whenever you watch this and see what's on that list right now and use that to inform your choices, and don't be all or nothing about it. Another option with organic and keeping your prices down is starting to get more familiar with and improving your cooking skills and learning how to cook more from scratch and with staples. I decided to start using dried beans. And so I can get organic dried beans, and they're way cheaper than the cheapest non-organic canned prepared cooked beans. And it was just something that I had to practice. It's not hard to do, but the shift for me was that being able to prepare in advance. If I want to walk into my kitchen 10 minutes before I want to eat, then I need a can of beans, and then I have the beans. But if I just make the beans, make a whole big pot of beans, some go in the fridge, I throw the rest in the freezer, but they've all been cooked. I had to do that one day, but now they're there, and I essentially made my own canned beans. But I had to work ahead at it. So it was just a little bit of a routine. I just tackled that 1 month, did it 2 or 3 times, got used to it, and now it's no big deal at all. And I can move on to the next food challenge to up my game. So if you're able to get those bulk items, that's another way to get a lot of organics in your diet that's really saving you money and not costing money.
Just to go back to what you were saying before about to try to cut out meat out of our diet in order to improve the climate. And I'm just wondering, like you spoke about this before about how we can try to limit as much waste as possible. And I'm just wondering if you have like tips for how to actively improve, how to actively limit the amount of waste you put out each day.
So tips for reducing your food waste at home. One of the big ones is learning to trust your own eyes, nose, and mouth. What has happened is that we have this highly unregulated system out there of food labeling. Best by, sell by, serve by, fresh by, all these labels out there on the food, and that's not regulated. And they mean very different things for very different foods. And often those are communications between the food makers themselves and the store selling it. It's not even meant to be communication to the individual purchasing the food. So a lot of places, a lot of waste is coming out of people looking at the date and going, that's no good anymore, and chucking it. And so learning to go beyond just looking at that date and actually saying, is this still good anymore? Most foods you can tell really quickly. You can really trust yourself with that. And if you're not sure, then you can lean on the side of like, oh, it's maybe, okay, then toss it. But it may be really obvious, like, oh, this isn't even close to like being at all bad. This is totally fine. And so one tip is really starting to ignore those labels and make choices based on the way things look and smell. And if they look and smell okay, go ahead and give it a taste. And if it's good, if it looks and smells and tastes okay, you're good to go. So ignoring those labels, it's a huge education piece that you can be doing for yourself to realize, oh, this is not saying I'm going to be sick or that this is going to be disgusting based on this date. Another tip is to have a eat me first shelf in your fridge. Pay attention to what's going on in there. And if there's things that are going to go bad soon, or that when you just buy it, it's a fresh food that you know only has 2 or 3 days of life in it, put it on that eat me first shelf. And when it's time for you to decide what you want to eat, a lot of food waste is created by our mental frame of I can have whatever I want, whenever I want. I'm in the mood for sushi, I'm going to get sushi. I'm in the mood for Thai, whatever you're in the mood for, and then you just like make that happen. Instead, go to your fridge and say, what do I need to eat? What in here is ready to be eaten right now that's at its peak of freshness, and that by tomorrow is going to go to the compost or go to the garbage if it doesn't get eaten, and eaten that way. I just ate my lunch that way. In fact, I went in and I saw, oh, those microgreens they got like about a day left. So that needs to be part of my lunch. I need to eat that now. Another tip is to make the freezer your friend. Most food can be halted in its tracks of becoming yucky by just throwing it in the freezer. And so if you're about to go on vacation, you've got some bread that you're not going to be able to eat before you go, throw it in the freezer. When it defrosts, it's not going to be the most amazing bread, but it makes beautiful toast. It's perfect just that way as toast. And I often make large servings of things for my family. We eat it once, we eat it the next night for leftovers, and then I'm like, oh, they're done. If I put this out tomorrow, nobody's going to want to eat it again. So I can throw it in the freezer and bring it out a week or 2 weeks or a month later, and people aren't sick of it at that point. So making the freezer your friend is another tip. So make the freezer your friend, have that eat me first label, have that mind shift of looking for what's ready to be eaten rather than picking from the entire world as what your options are, and learn about what those labels and date expiration labels mean, and learn to trust your own senses. So to help connect the dots between why industrial animal agriculture and climate change are so closely linked, it's important to understand that greenhouse gases matter. For the 800,000 years before the Industrial Revolution, the concentration of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere remained stable. Since the Industrial Revolution, the concentration of carbon dioxide has increased by about 40%. In addition, methane and nitrous oxide are the second and third most prevalent greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and they are far more potent than carbon dioxide. Because climate change is a ticking time bomb, not all greenhouse gases matter equally. Methane has 34 times the global warming potential, meaning the ability to trap heat, over a century than carbon dioxide does. Over 2 decades, methane is 86 times more powerful. So methane and nitrous oxide, while there aren't as much of them in the atmosphere, their ability to trap heat, their ability to warm our atmosphere to create climate change is significantly higher. And methane and nitrous oxide are coming from industrial animal agriculture. As they digest food, cattle, goats, and sheep produce a significant amount of methane, mostly through belching it, but also through exhaling, farting, and passed in their waste. Livestock's the leading source of methane emissions. And then nitrous oxide is emitted through livestock urine, manure, and the fertilizer used for growing their feed crops. And again, livestock's the leading source of nitrous oxide emissions. Because we are in a hurry to end climate change, because it's right now that we need to be reversing this climb in temperature, getting these super powerful greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxide, out of our atmosphere or reduced in our atmosphere more quickly. That's why reducing your consumption of products that come from industrial animal agriculture is so important. It's not that carbon dioxide isn't important, and we absolutely need to be working on that as well. But if we're thinking, how do we do this very quickly and fast and urgently, we have to address these methane and nitrous oxide sources. In terms of reducing the amount of industrial animal agricultural products that you eat, it's not an all or nothing. As I was sharing in another part of this interview, that we don't have to make perfect the enemy of the good. I'm a perfectionist, so I say that phrase to myself quite often because I'm like, I want to do it all perfect. And if I can't, I kind of give up and I just get frustrated. And I realize that progress really matters. And so there are a lot of ways to experiment. And I'm going to give you 6 ideas, and you can see if any of them are something you'd like to try out. One is commit to having 1 meal a day that is plant-based. For me, that's a commitment I've actually made, and almost all the time it's my breakfast. It doesn't always have to be the same meal, and you can see what works best for you. But pick just 1 meal a day, and then whatever you want the rest of the day, but a 1 meal a day that's all plant-based. Another option could be to swap it. Pick one animal product that you have and swap it out for a plant-based version. That could be milk, it could be chicken, it could be cheese, ice cream. Just find one that you have, and maybe one that you have a lot, and then play around. There's a lot of substitutes out there. I have found some really fabulous. I've experimented a bit, and I've found a nut milk that I'm really happy with, and I don't miss dairy milk, cow milk at all. I've found some great ice creams. I'll tell you, I'm still struggling. I can't figure out the sour cream. I haven't found a plant-based sour cream that I really love, but I don't have to give myself a hard time about that because I'm working on other fronts. So try one product and swap it. Another option can be to cut it in half. You may have dishes you like that have a lot of meat in them. It could be burgers or chili or a lasagna. take the quantity of meat that you normally put in that recipe and cut it in half and replace it with veggies or a fake meat crumble, or there's a great recipe out there for mushroom burgers that's half beef and half mushroom. So find ways where you can substitute and just reduce the quantity, or not, or it can be replacing with vegetables. Maybe it's a stir fry you usually make and usually put in 8 ounces 8 ounces of chicken per person for a serving. Just cut it in half and fill up the rest with more vegetables, more rice, whatever it may be. So cut it in half. Another option can be to pick one day a week to go plant-based. You've probably heard of meatless Mondays, but you can make it meatless Tuesdays. You can make it meatless Shabbats. Whatever you want to choose, pick one day a week and just be plant-based for that one day. Another option, a fifth option, is what I call in or out. And you could choose to be entirely plant-based eating when you're at home, but when you're out in the world, not, or vice versa. Be an omnivore at home, but be a vegan out in the world. And when you're eating at restaurants and events out there, so in or out, play around with that. A sixth one to look at is, you may have noticed I keep saying industrial animal agriculture. I keep saying this really long phrase. And I really want to separate out the fact that it really matters how animals are raised, the impact that they're having on the earth, not to mention the impact on their own welfare. And so there are ways that animals can be raised that are way better for their welfare, better for the earth. The environmental impact of how they're raised is not nearly as damaging. And so I do want to separate out that. So this isn't to say all animal products necessarily, but the ones that are raised in conventional industrial ways are really, really bad for the earth. So a sixth step could be to learn about regenerative agriculture. So regenerative agriculture is a way to, sorry, that scrambled me a second. So regenerative agriculture is a way of growing that protects the soil and that doesn't extract more nutrients out of the earth than the earth has to provide, and helps the soil capture more carbon than is being released with what you're doing on that soil. So you can actually do like carbon negative farming and carbon negative raising of animals by doing it in such a way that you're pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere because of how you're caring for the soil. So one thing you can do is learn about companies and businesses that are raising their animals for their dairy or egg or meat products in a way that is good for the land, and start to support those companies and be getting your animal products from those that are using regenerative practices.
What are a few misunderstood actions that people do in efforts to be more sustainable, but in reality causes more damage?
Some of the misconceptions that can be out there around environmental actions are the idea that if you're doing just one thing right, you're good to go. There's a lot of people that think that, oh, I got my reusable water bottle, I can do anything else that I want now. And so to be realistic about the impact of your choices, one of the statistics that I've heard out there is that people will get a hybrid car and then start driving a lot more because they think, oh, I have a hybrid car now. So and then suddenly they're amping up the number of miles they're driving. And so to not make those false exchanges and use good environmental choice as an excuse to make bad ones. So another really misconception, although I think people are learning more about that now, is you're used to seeing those 3 arrows that go around for recycling, and it says reduce, reuse, recycle. And recycling gets a lot of attention, and people tend to think that those things are all equal. You can reduce, you can reuse, you can recycle. Reducing is by far the best choice, by reducing the waste in the first place. And then reuse, and then as a last resort, recycle. So, like with a piece of paper, I can stop and think, wait, do I even need to print on this? Okay, I needed to print on it. I printed on it. I'm going to reuse it. That sucker's got a whole other side to it. I've got a whole drawer here of one-sided paper. That's stuff I've used, agendas I've taken to meetings, and I save it. And then it's going to go back in my printer when I can reuse it and use the other side. My kids then sometimes will play with that paper and make origami and airplanes with it, and we get even a little bit more reusing out of it. And then at the end of the day, we will recycle it. And this applies with food as well. Compost is getting a lot of attention, and people can feel like, yay, I composted it. And believe me, compost is really important. We were talking before about the impact of methane on climate change. One of the reasons food waste is so high up on impact is that food that goes to landfills, which is where most of the food waste is going, is decomposing in an anaerobic environment and leaching off waves and waves of methane. So composting doesn't go into an anaerobic environment, it's an aerobic environment, and so it's not spitting off that methane. So food going to compost isn't sending out that methane to warm our climate. And by the way, it's also going to create high nutrient soil that we can then use to grow things with. However, another huge part of our food waste is coming from the inputs on the front end. All the work we did to grow that food, all the watering, all the fertilizing, all the labor, harvesting, cooling, packaging, shipping from here to there, all of that is contributing to the environmental impact of that food. So for the food to do all that, us put in all those inputs and then just toss it, we tossed with it all those inputs that we put in. Even if we've composted it and we're not having the methane at the end, we've still wasted everything up until that point. And the Environmental Protection Agency, our EPA, put out the food recovery hierarchy. And the very top thing is to reduce the food waste to begin with. And we talked about some of the tips and ways to do that as individuals in our homes. The next one is to feed people. So if you have leftovers from a bar mitzvah or a wedding or a big family event, or just from your own home that you're just, I'm done, I bought the salad dressing, I don't really like it, I'm going to throw it out. Maybe there's someone that just likes it and you can give it to them. Find people who will eat the food. The next beyond that is find animals that will eat the food. Below that is, and this is a harder one, but converting that food into energy through biodigesters. That's a kind of a high-tech solution and not readily available to most people. But then is compost. It's actually at the bottom of that list of all those things that are what the best environmental thing to be doing with food waste is. And so that's one of the myths that's out there. So recycling is great and composting is great. Let's just remember that they're great compared to trashing things. And what we really want to be doing is reducing the amount of things we're composting or recycling to begin with.
It's great. Yeah, thank you. Like thinking about all these things you've been saying, these ways people can do this. How and you can say this like specifically to someone of a younger age, or you can say it just in general. But taking these things, how can one person or maybe a couple people take these things and bring them to their own community? So right, they've done these personally, but like a really important thing is like taking it to your community and trying to get. And so how do you have any like ways that people can take this and like ways they can talk about it? And how did they like inspire that change within the community? How do you present that to them? Do you have any like ways for youth to do that?
So one of the ways that you can be a leader and an advocate for change is just by being a good model. I learned from Jonathan Safran Foer from his book, We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast, about the impact our food choices have, for example. So I'd like to share with you a quote from that book. He writes, "Unless you buy your food in secret and eat it in a closet, you don't eat alone. Our food choices are social contagions, always influencing others around us. Supermarkets track each item sold. Restaurants adjust their menus to demand. Food services look at what gets thrown away, and we order what she's having. We eat as families, communities, generations, nations, and increasingly as a globe. Individual consumer choices can activate collective action. That's generative and not paralyzing. I'll read that again. Individual consumer choices can activate collective action. We couldn't stop our eating from radiating influence even if we wanted to, which was a really great teaching for me because I want to change the world, right? I want to go out and I want you to do the right thing and you to do the right thing and you to do the right thing. And to realize by me just doing it as a model, that's one of the biggest influences that I can have. And so if I just stop and check myself right there and realize that me and my choices, I suddenly am so empowered as a leader because I don't have to go and make other people do anything. As long as I'm doing it myself. And honestly, you were asking before about what some of the myths are. Some of the myths out there is that it's them, those people over there, it's the climate change deniers, or those other bad people with their obviously gas guzzling car, or whatever it is, their 20 international vacations a year. It is us. We as Americans are living the lifestyles that require us to have 4 planets to meet our needs. It's me and you. And so when we stop saying it's them who are the bad guys and trying to get everybody else to change, and we actually just stop and look at our own behavior and start getting ourselves in check with that closest circle, that's where we can be really powerful because people are seeing that and we are executing that influence. When we go to our synagogue and ask for, we don't have to go in and say, you shouldn't serve all this food at an oneg like this. This food doesn't reflect any of the values we just talked about in our service. You can just go and ask, I'm wondering if this could be available for me, for my choices, for my household, or me and some of my friends who I know like this. Start there with that, advocating for yourself and being a leader in that way. And so I really don't want that to get missed. And sometimes we can get so busy with saving the world and throwing our capes on and like not even modeling that behavior ourselves. It's a missed opportunity. Now that doesn't need to be a like, oh my God, everybody's watching me and I just, drove a car when I could have taken a bus. I feel so terrible. Like it's not about being perfect everywhere at all. But it is about starting to look at where am I making my biggest impacts and where can I start to be making changes. And don't neglect the influence of that. Then it's, of course, absolutely one of the greatest places we can be making an influence is in our larger circles where we have connections. And Project Drawdown, this organization that has looked at the changes we need to make to reverse climate change, they've also looked at where we can get active as individuals. There's our personal behavior. There's our most micro circle, which is, say, our family or our very closest friends. And then there's a slightly larger circle, our schools, our workplaces, our houses of worship. And then much larger is our national government, our state government, large corporations. And they say that the most powerful place that we can be making change as individuals is that middle level, our schools, our synagogues, those places, because the influence that we as individuals can make there are really quite powerful and quite effective. You don't need to recruit a whole army to really make serious change in a classroom, in a youth group, etc. And so do take that. So my earlier preaching about like, just be a model yourself, that all applies, but absolutely don't stop there. If you're motivated, if you're inspired, please take that and move forward. And a tip that I've been sharing with people lately is curiosity, really asking a lot of questions and being as invested in learning how other people about these things as you are invested in them understanding your take on things. You may encourage resistance like, well, we can't afford that, or it's never been done that way, or this is just going to take too much time. Inquire and learn why they really think that. You may learn that they might actually be right in that particular instance, or you may learn that that's been true historically, but now that I really understand the issue, I can actually see how we can work around it and how I could raise the money or how I could put in the time or how that's actually outmoded and was true 3 years ago, but isn't true anymore now. So do some learning about why some things aren't happening. And especially I will say to younger people watching this, like your voices are so powerful. I have been trying to make change in my synagogue around food choices, and there's a lot of resistance. And it occurred to me that I need to be reaching out to the young leaders in my community. And I'm happy to say that there's a wonderful young woman named Bella who's part of the Jewish youth climate movement. And I realized if she and her colleagues are talking to our congregation about food choices, they are not going to get the kind of pushback that I get. And you may be in a unique position as a young leader to be making change because your voices are respected and admired in a different way. And that's perhaps a healthy dynamic. And so leverage that a little bit if you can.
If you have like one thing to stick out to like, if for someone who wants to like really make that change, what do you think is the most important thing that you shared with us for that person who just kind of wants to initiate that positive change in their community?
One of my biggest inspirations that has helped me stay focused on the work that I'm doing is that this is a hope and future focused work that I'm doing. I am thinking about what I am for. The word Hazon means vision. And I don't have to focus so much on what I'm against and what I don't want. I can think about what I want the world to be and lean into that and start living that way. And so when I go and buy food from Natalie, my farmer at Isabel Farm here in Lafayette, that's activism. I am giving my money and my attention to a local grower who's caring for the land, who's supporting our local community, and feeding me nourishing food. That's activism. I am creating the future I want. And why this lesson is important is that I want to say that I've been doing this work for more than 25 years, and I'm not burned out. A lot of us get into this work, we bust our butts, we work so hard, and we burn out, and we just kind of lose interest and move on to something else. To stay in this for the long haul, think about the future you want and just start living that way. And if you're not able to, because those things don't exist, help make them come into existence. Help there be renewable energy options available. Help there be more recycling options available. Help your community be strong and resilient with a local food shed that can feed people in tough times. And that is fulfilling and joyful. And I also want to hammer home that so much, it can feel like restrictive. I can't do this, I can't do that. Environmentalism is like making I have to walk everywhere. And like, there can just be this like really negative attitude around it. And there's a woman who has passed away. Her name is Granny D. Her name was Doris Haddock. Granny D was her nickname. And she was an activist, and she walked across the country in her 90s to raise awareness for the causes she cared about. Walked across the United States of America. And what she said was, aren't we privileged to live in a time when everything's at stake and when our efforts make a difference in the eternal contest between the forces of light and shadow, between togetherness and division, between justice and exploitation? Oh, be joyful that you are a warrior in this great time. Be joyful that you're a warrior in this great time. So I love that teaching. It fills me every time I hear it. I love to share it with others and embrace that. This is amazing, joyful work that we're doing. We're very lucky that our choices matter so much. That's not a source of guilt or burden. It's a source of power. It's a source of joy. And I hope you'll lean into that.